Now, as I was saying to the fellow in Swansea, 15% of those getting divorced and citing unreasonable behaviour on the part of their husbands blame it on the video games. Personally, I never saw what others saw in the video game. But the one thing that I caution all of you who are addicted to these games is don't lose your wife for a video game, because trust me, you'll regret it. Dr. Ryan G Van Cleave is the international speaker on video game addiction, and he's the professor of liberal arts at the Ringling College of Art and Design. He's the author of Unplugged, My Journey into the Dark World of Video Game Addiction. The problem spouses encounter with video game addiction is that the non-gamer doesn't appreciate that it's an addiction. We better hear from Dr. Ryan now. Thank you very much for joining us from Florida, sir.
Thanks for having me, George. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
And you. Now, this has come as a bit of a surprise to some of my listeners tonight, who hadn't understood that the tripling in a year of the number of people getting divorced citing video games as the other party, as the correspondent, as we used to say. Now, once upon a time, people got divorced because another woman was involved, or another man. They got divorced because the man was addicted to strong drink. And then it became addicted to pornography on the internet. But now, the absolutely childish pastime of video games is breaking up a huge number of marriages. Tell us about it.
Well, you're exactly right. It's the reality is that more and more people are living their lives, or a large portion of it, online, and a lot of people are finding them more pleasurable than the troubles that they perceive in their real life. Here in America, we've got lots of people out of work or underemployed. You know, people all across the world in marriages where they feel unappreciated. It's kind of easy on one hand to see why they might be drawn more towards a game or online environments where they feel satisfied and appreciated. Of course, that's a pretty fleeting thing, and you're exactly right. It's not the sort of life that most of us would choose to lead, but a lot of us find ourselves making those choices and regretting it later.
And it's men on their own, isn't it? One critic earlier this evening said, well, what's wrong with the man being on online playing video games with the kids? But in fact, it's men on video games on their own, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of the appeal of these games is that there is a sense of community there. But if community is looking and talking to people through screens and over a cable, that's a pretty poor sense for what community has meant throughout history. I don't think that that's a real good replacement for social interaction that we seem to have opportunities for, but seem to also avoid in real life.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, the question then arises, is it an addiction? Isn't, some people say, I have some sympathy for this myself, that we too easily call things an addiction. That people are forming habits, yes, and they're doing things that are harmful to themselves, to their families, to the society, but the cop-out is to say, well, it's an addiction. You know, Michael Douglas had a sex addiction when his wife caught him in bed with another woman. Other people drink and they say it's an addiction. They take drugs, they say it's an addiction. Is video games really an addiction?
That's a great question, and a lot of people would say no, but more and more there seems to be evidence that a number of people are suffering from an unyielding compulsion to continue to play. Now, there is a large percentage of people who just abuse it in the same way that some people abuse alcohol or drugs, but they're not addicted to it. They just use it to escape their life or their marriage, and that certainly happens with video games. But there is about 5 to 8% of people who do game who seem to have that unyielding compulsion. They just cannot help but go back to the game.
Well, presumably this problem is going to be with us now for eternity. I mean, nobody's falling out of love with these games. They sell more tickets than the movies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The technology is one of the reasons that more people are gaming than ever before. Back in 20, 30 years ago when games were coming out, they were pretty simplistic and they were pretty repetitive, so they didn't have a lot of replay value. You played them for a little while and you were really done with them. But today, they make you such an immersive part of it. The choices that you make impact what happens. Unlike in the movies, where you can scream and shout all you want, but the characters will just continue to make the same choices independent of what you choose. In the video games, you are the hero, and you feel an importance and I guess a relevance that a lot of us don't feel in our lives. You're exactly right. There are more and more options, and they're made to be very compelling.
I mean, there you are, speaking to me from the United States, one of the most beautiful countries in the world, from sea to shining sea, from the Everglades in Florida to the redwoods in the far north, the glimmering cities on the hill that America wanted to be, and yet more and more people are staying indoors with the curtains closed, sitting in their underwear, alone, on a computer.
Well, that is the reality. You're exactly right. And I think part of this is this culture of fear that we have perpetrated from all the terrorist attacks and, of course, the food crisis. And here in the States, we had flooding recently, and then we had Hurricane Katrina. We've got people so scared that they don't let their kids outside anymore, and so they've learned to adapt. So we've got a whole new generation or two who are content to live lives indoors. And, of course, we know that's not satisfying enough. So where do they get their outlet? And it's through things like this, through video games and social networks and things like that. So it's no surprise that they've learned to primarily exist in those realms.
Dr. Van Cleave, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Florida, where anyone in their right mind would, of course, be outdoors in the Florida sunshine, but more and more in Florida, as indeed across the Western world, and who knows where it'll go after this, are addicted, hooked on these video games. I think it's an abomination, but you may have a different view.